right, so we all know that life can oftentimes be difficult. It's hard. But sometimes there are things in our lives that feel a little bit more than just difficult, a little bit more than hard. Sometimes things come in and it feels chaotic, out of control. And sometimes we've even witnessed things that we might even call dark, very dark situations. You sometimes see someone's life spiraling out of control, and you can't explain what's going on, what's happening. Maybe a friend or a family member falls into patterns of addiction. And at first it looks like it's just a few bad choices here and there. But as things progress, as things go on, you begin to sense that there might be something deeper going on. Something is pulling the strings, so to speak. Something is nudging people. And you watch people isolate themselves. They push everybody away. Their laughter disappears. Their eyes seem distant. They're not just sad, they're beginning to look lost. Maybe it's someone that you've encountered, crippled by anxiety or fear, afraid even to get out of bed, to leave their room, to leave the house. Maybe it's someone that is just drinking more and more just to feel less and less in their life. Maybe it looks like a teenager that cuts themselves and hides it under their sleeves. Or maybe it's just someone you've encountered in the street. When you look at them, you can't even begin to think how they got there. What happened? How did life make them end up where they are? And we live in a time where people more and more feel invisible, right? They feel unloved, insignificant, worthless, especially as people compare their lives with other people. When they compare the greatness of someone's athletic achievements or their artistic ability, and you look at yourself and there seems to be this thought that I'm no one, I'm nobody. And we live in an age of explanations. We try to explain why these things happen. Why is mental health something that is on the rise? Mental illness. There's explanations, therapy, medication, trauma, diagnosis. And all those things are real. They're good. They're often necessary. But if we stop there, we're missing something essential. Something we're going to get into in our passage this morning. Behind the pain of this world, there is a spiritual dimension that our society is often too sophisticated to talk about. A darkness that doesn't show up on a scan or a blood test. The Bible talks about spiritual war. Satan and demons at work. An invisible enemy who wants to distort and destroy everything that God created to be good. And if you remember, in Genesis, God created humans. He created man and women to be good, to be fruitful on this earth. And no, that doesn't mean that every struggle, as we're going to see this morning, we're going to talk about a man that is possessed by a demon, by multiple demons. I'm not saying that everyone has a demon inside. That's not the point. But it does mean that the enemy is always at work, trying to pull the strings, trying to nudge people in a certain direction, twisting the truth, pushing people further and further away from the light that God came to bring through Jesus. Now, sometimes that enemy hides subtly in our habits, in the things we do on a daily basis. Sometimes it hides in our pride. Sometimes it hides in our personal idols. Other times, darkness is just in full force. We see it in violent actions, chaos, destruction, things that are visibly evil. And in those moments, whether it's subtle or whether it's blatant, the question is not what program is going to fix this, or what self-help book can we give people so that they could snap out of it as they read a book. The real question is, who has the power, or what has the power to set somebody free? Now that's the question Mark 5 answers for us this morning. We've been on a journey through the Gospel of Mark. We're now at chapter 5, and we're going to witness or encounter a man that no one could help until he met Jesus. A man who was completely defiled and defaced and nearly destroyed until Jesus stepped out of the boat, until Jesus stepped ashore and had something to do for this man. So let's read together Mark chapter 5. If you have your Bibles or you want to follow along on the screen, we're reading this story. Now this story it's a difficult story to read. And there's a lot here, but I hope that we can learn together as we read this. It says, they came to the other side of the sea, to the region of the Gerasenes. As soon as he, Jesus, got out of the boat, a man with an unclean spirit came out of the tombs and met him. He lived in the tombs, and no one was able to restrain him anymore, not even with a chain, because he often had been bound with shackles and chains, but had torn the chains apart and smashed the shackles. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and knelt down before him, and he cried out with a loud voice, "What do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you before God, don't torment me." For he had told him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." "What is your name?" he asked. "My name is Legion," he answered him, "because we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the region. A large herd of pigs was there, feeding on the hillside. The demons begged him, "Send us to the pigs so that we may enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs. The herd of about 2,000 rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned there. The men who tended them ran off and reported it in the town and the countryside, and people went to see what had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the man who had been demon-possessed sitting there, dressed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. Those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told them about the pigs. Then they began to beg him to leave their region. As he, Jesus, was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged him earnestly that he might remain with him. Jesus did not let him, but told him, "Go home to your own people and report to them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So he went out and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and they were all amazed. This is the word of the Lord. Now, for those of you who weren't here last week, I want to give you a little background. This is what happened at the end of chapter 4. Jesus and his disciples are in a boat. They get into a boat. They're going to cross the sea. Suddenly a storm hits. Jesus is sleeping. The disciples are terrified that this storm is violent. They think they're going to die. And what does Jesus do? He gets up and he says to the storm, "Silence, be still." And so we learn that Jesus has authority over nature. The disciples, though, they're not excited. They're actually afraid of Jesus. They ask, "Who is this that even the wind and the seas obey him?" They recognize who it is that's in front of them. A man that is powerful. They are standing in front of God in the flesh. But here's the fascinating part. If you recognize or read the text, no one answers that question. They ask the question, "Who then is this?" But no one answers it. The first person to answer the question is actually here in this passage. A demon answers the question. Because the next storm that Jesus is confronting is not in the sky, it's not a storm, it's actually inside of this man. Mark 5:1 says, "They came to the other side of the sea, to the region of the Gerasenes." So let's set the scene here. This land is Gentile land. In other words, these are non-Jewish people, or often half-Jewish. And Jewish people didn't want to hang out with these people. They were unclean. They were not worthy of being part of the people of God. And so you see that there are tombs described. There are pigs. Pigs are an unclean animal for the Jewish people. This is a region that they would not even go to, yet Jesus decided to go and cross the sea to this region. And immediately they're met by someone that is extra unclean. Right? Mark tells us that he has an unclean spirit, but it's even darker than that. This man is living in the tombs. It's as if somebody was living in a cemetery, except that the cemeteries we have nowadays are nice, right? They keep them up. We have people that take care of the lawn and all that. They bring flowers. These weren't pretty tombs. This man was living in the middle of all of this. It says that no one could restrain him. He was crazy. He was even just howling and shouting and cutting himself with stones. I don't know if you can picture that, but it's a pretty crazy scene here. Now, this is a picture here. The reason why this story is here, why Jesus crossed, is because it's a picture of what Satan wants to do, what he wishes he could do to every human being on this earth. If he could push everyone into a place of darkness, he would. And Mark wants us to see this clearly. Satan defiles, defaces, and destroys, or tries to destroy, the image of God. This man is spiritually unclean. He's physically broken. He's socially exiled. He harms himself to end the pain, maybe to end his life. He can't take what is going on. He's living more like an animal. Remember, God created in the beginning in Genesis man to be good, to be fruitful. And yet Satan's job is to defile that image, to lead people further and further away from the goodness of God and deeper into darkness. And here we see it in the flesh. Remember that Jesus said that the thief comes to steal, to kill, to destroy. Peter said in 1 Peter, "Your enemy, the devil, prowls like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour." This man wasn't just broken, he was being unmade. Now let's be clear here. I want to make a note of something so that we're not confused. I'm not saying that everyone who struggles with certain things is possessed by a demon. Not everyone who has anxiety or depression or an addiction is demon possessed. That's not what I'm saying. That's not the point of the passage. But I am saying this. There is a spiritual enemy at work. An enemy who pulls the strings behind the scenes. Who feeds lies, who inflames pain, who leads people into their own destruction. Now, I recently watched a few episodes of the Rings of Power show on TV, and I found it interesting how there's a character that leads people to believe that the choices that they're making that are leading to their own destruction are their own ideas. He's the one pulling the strings, leading this character to do things that he wouldn't normally do. And at the end, he's like, but you made this choice. But you put yourself into this situation. But this is your fault. That's what the enemy tries to do in our lives. You put yourself in this situation. You should hate yourself. You are insignificant. You are worth nothing. This man's community had tried everything. They chained this man. They banished him. They avoided him. And nothing worked. Until Jesus stepped out of the boat. When Jesus stepped ashore. Now I can imagine the disciples pulling up to the beach, still dripping from the storm. Remember, they just went through a whole storm. They're terrified. They're now afraid of Jesus. And then, out of nowhere, they step out of the boat. And this crazy man charges at them. And maybe Peter turns to Jesus and says, Jesus, let's get back into the boat. We shouldn't be here. But Jesus doesn't flinch, right? He walks forward. Because he came not just to calm the storm and to show who he was, but also to confront the storm within this man, to show that he has authority over everything. Mark 6, 5-6. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and knelt down before him. Now, I don't want you to mistake this for this man coming to worship God. That's not what's going on. He's not falling down in devotion to God. But he's falling down because he's overwhelmed by the power that he senses. A power that he cannot fight. And what happens next in verse 7, it says, he cried out with a loud voice, "What do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you before God, don't torment me." This man, possessed, tormented, is screaming through the voice of a demon. Or maybe thousands of them. And even in their rebellion, they recognize who Jesus is. Isn't that interesting? They call him by the name that his disciples haven't recognized yet. You are Jesus, Son of the Most High God. Isn't that striking? Back in the boat, the disciples were asking, who is this? Who is Jesus? And now a demon knows exactly who Jesus is. Evil trembles at the presence of Jesus. Evil obeys Jesus' command. Verse 8 tells us, for he had told him, come out of the man, you unclean spirit. Once again, as we've seen throughout all of the Gospel of Mark, Jesus doesn't do some ritual, some long prayer, no magic words. He commands and evil starts to tremble. The kingdom of darkness starts to collapse. Jesus isn't sweating here. He's not straining. He speaks and the demons begin to beg. Verse 9. What is your name? He asked the man. My name is Legion, he answered him, because we are many. Now, for some context, a legion of soldiers in this time in the Roman Empire could be up to 5,000 soldiers. And so whether literal or symbolic, the point is clear here. This man is infested. He's completely overtaken. And yet, even 5,000 demons bow to one Savior. They bow to Jesus. And then we have a very interesting scene that makes us scratch our heads, right? The demons beg not to be destroyed, but be sent to the pigs. In verse 13, so he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs. The herd of about 2,000 rushed down a steep bank into the sea and drowned there. And so the first question, if you read this in modern times, is poor pigs, right? Why did Jesus let this happen? But if you read into the context, there's two very important things going on here. The pigs in this passage represent economic profit. They represent business. They represent economic comfort. Some wealthy man owned this large herd of pigs. They were going to bring a lot of money. This is not a family pet situation going on. This is a commercial herd, a large-scale operation. And so Mark includes it not to stir pity, but to show what happens when spiritual power and when the restoration of a man is up against material priorities. And it sets up what happens next. The townspeople, if you notice, they don't rejoice over what's happening. They panic over the pigs. Not because they think poor little piggies. They think, there goes our money. They care more about the profit loss than a restored soul, than a soul restored. Jesus is drawing a line here. He's making a comparison. He's saying, what's more valuable to you? Your money, your business, your portfolio, or a person? And that's a question we have to ask ourselves even today. What's more valuable to us? Our money, our business, our career, or seeking out those who are lost, who need help, who need healing, who need Jesus? The pigs also reveal the destructive intent of the demons. Jesus wants to show what the demons wanted to do to the man. They wanted to kill this man. They wanted this man to take his life. So the pigs symbolize what Satan wants to do to the good creation that we are. And here Jesus shows the true face of evil. It always wants to lead us to destruction. It wants to isolate us. It wants to put us in a place where we can no longer see the light. That's what sin does. During our Bible study, we went through this progression on Wednesday of what the pattern of sin does in our lives. It shows up as a desire. We have a desire for something. Whether a desire for pleasure, a desire to earn something, a desire to achieve something, and that desire turns into a temptation, and that temptation could lead to sin and could eventually lead to death. Not just physical death, but the death of a family. When someone, one of the two makes the choice to cheat on their spouse, it leads to the death of a family oftentimes. When you decide to pursue your career instead of your family, it can lead to the death of a family. This moment here reminds us that demons are real. Evil is active. Satan is always active, seeking how to destroy. But Jesus is King. And here's what else it reminds us. What is destructive in your life, what is destructive in the life of someone that you love, what is destructive in the life of the people that look lost, is not beyond the authority of Jesus. That addiction, that compulsion, that spiritual heaviness that won't lift, it may feel like it owns the person, it may feel like it owns you, but it's nothing compared to the voice of Jesus. He speaks and darkness obeys. I imagine the moment of silence as the pigs vanish into the sea. Probably thousands of squeals and then nothing. Confusion. Now the man that was howling and screaming and crazy is now silent, still breathing heavily, but his bloody, barefoot, and blinking. He just woke up, but he's not scared anymore. He's not shaking anymore. He's not surprised, because this is why Jesus came, to confront evil, to reclaim people, to speak a word that breaks spiritual chains. So, the pigs are gone. The herdsmen, it says, are terrified. They run off. They tell the people what happened. And here's what happens next. Verse 15. They came to Jesus and saw the man who had been demon-possessed, sitting there, dressed and in his right mind. And they should be celebrating, right? This man is restored. Wow. Instead, like the disciples, they are afraid. Not rejoicing, not amazed, they're afraid. Why? Because they know this man. They knew the screams. They knew and they'd heard the chains. They'd warned their kids to stay away from the tombs. And now he's calmed, he's clothed, he's in his right mind, and the power that made it happen is standing right in front of them. That kind of power unsettles people. A man that is enslaved is free. A man that was tormented is whole. A man that was feared is now in peace. You'd expect the celebration, but instead the people beg Jesus, just leave. Why is the question? Because Jesus disrupted their lives. He disrupted their business. He disrupted this man. And now they're afraid, how is he going to disrupt our lives? What else is he going to do in our town? We'd rather stay exactly how we are than let this man come and have authority over us. And maybe more than anything, he made them wonder, if Jesus can change him, what might he do with me? And they're not ready for that. But let's not be too quick to judge them, because we do the same thing today. Jesus still provokes that kind of fear. When you hear what Jesus can do and wants to do in your life, we often run away. We'd rather stay how we are. We love the idea of healing, but not of surrender. We love the idea of Jesus fixing some things here and there, but not the idea of completely surrendering our lives to his word. We want Jesus to fix the broken parts, but not to rearrange our lives. But the man who had been healed, he feels very differently. Jesus is getting into the boat because he's respectful. He never just comes upon somebody's life. He is a gentleman. If you don't want Jesus, he's not going to be part of your life. He's ready to turn away. But this man begs him, please, Jesus, let me go with you. Let me stay with you. In effect, he's saying, I want to follow you. I'll do anything. Just don't leave me behind. I don't want to go back to this life. And Jesus says, no. In verse 19, go home to your own people and report to them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. Why didn't Jesus let this man follow him? Because the people might have rejected Jesus, but he hasn't rejected them yet. even though they told him to go away, he's about to send his first missionary. The first preacher that Jesus sends out is not the disciples. The first person that is sent to proclaim the gospel of Jesus doesn't have a seminary education, doesn't have the training of a rabbi, doesn't even have the ability to say that he was a normal man. He was a crazy man in the tombs. The first preacher Jesus sends to proclaim the good news is a demon, an ex-demon possessed man. The first person Jesus commissions as a preacher in the Gospel of Mark is a man who was possessed by demons. A man who had just met Jesus hours earlier, and that was enough. To know Jesus was enough to be able to proclaim his goodness and his power. So what does he do in verse 20? He went out and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And they were all amazed. He obeys Jesus. He walks right into the towns that had cast him out. Back to the places where people knew his past. Back to the people that feared him. And now they see a new man, same face, same name, but something has changed. And it's unmistakable. And he tells them again and again, let me tell you what Jesus has done for me. This is not in the scriptures. This is just my imagination. And I have an imagination. But I imagine him walking up to a town. Kids are starting to scramble away. Here comes the crazy man. People are telling, move out of the way. What is he going to do this time? Look for some chains. Maybe in there's a woman, gray hair, ashamed, desperately praying and crying. But then she freezes as she notices something different. She cried out every night to God, and now her son is standing in front of her, whole and restored. She walks and notices that he has no blood, no bruises, no rage, and he tells her, Mother, let me tell you what a man has done for me. I met a man named Jesus, the Son of the Most High God. Let me tell you what he's done for me. And that story is a story that continues to play out in many people's lives, even today. There's a film called Break Every Chain. Some of you might want to go home and watch it today or this week. It's based on a true story of a man named Jonathan Hickory. He was a police officer, a husband, a father. On the outside, everything looked fine, but on the inside, everything was falling apart. I won't spoil too much of the movie if you want to watch it, but he makes a series of choices. He sees friends die, co-workers, trauma, darkness, death. It hardens him. He turns to alcohol. He turns to addiction. He turns to rage. He gets into isolation. His life is so dark that he points a gun at his head and is ready to end it all. People had tried to help. People thought he was too far gone. He made too many mistakes. He had become, in his own words, a man no one could help. But then Jesus stepped out of the boat for him. Through the prayers of his wife, through a chaplain who refused to give up, through the quiet but powerful presence of God, this man, Jonathan, encountered the mercy of Christ, and he was completely changed. He found peace, sobriety, purpose. He became a chaplain and is now a chaplain. He tells his story to anyone who listens. And just like the man in Mark 5, he went from tormented to commissioned. He went from darkness to proclamation, from isolated to sent. Because when Jesus changes you, you don't stay silent. You proclaim. Now, you might have a friend, a family member, who you might feel is too far gone, too broken. But Jesus invites us to step in to prayer, to not give up hope, to recognize that His power is still present today. So keep pressing in, keep leaning in, keep praying, because the power of God is not going to be able, to penetrate even the darkest of places, the situations that seem lost. And when Jesus changes someone's life, go home, go to your friends, and proclaim the goodness and the good that the Lord has done for you, just like He did for this man.